All right, recording has started.
All right. I suppose we'll start out as we always do with some prayer. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for providing for our daily needs, uh, and thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you for the beautiful eclipse that we had yesterday. And I pray that our study tonight would be edifying and glorifying to you. That, Father, if you could please protect the recordings as well, it would be even more. We would be very grateful for that as well, so that we can go back and listen to them and share with others our studies and our own learning. And if it'd be possible that we could recover yesterday, last
No,
week's
that's fine.
recording as
Yeah.
well, that would be
So
awesome.
yeah, just like I was
I pray that
stating.
we
Yeah,
would
just like I was stating earlier. I've got this
um,
comic that hopefully
learn
I
from
can
your
start
word,
getting
that your
done,
Holy
and maybe
Spirit would
some of
guide
you
us
guys
tonight,
will be a good fit for
and
some of the characters.
that we be
Check out
edified
Heroic
from each other.
Shenanigans on
And I pray all this in Jesus'
Webtoons
name. Um,
whenever you can. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
all right, so
All right.
last week we touched on the first half
Yeah,
or so of
that
the
was my
Ten
goal, and really
Commandments
trying.
in
One of my goals from trying
Exodus
to get this
chapter
all out of the
20,
way was like, hey, we've got all
and
this
we
potential for smaller
stopped
artists and content
after
creators and
the
actors, to really get
first four
a step up,
commandments,
and
which go
that's
and talk
really part of the
about
goal
our
of this server.
relationship to
So
God
hopefully
and
we can
our
really
responsibilities.
just hit the ground running,
So
and
the first
this can
commandment, thou
be
shalt have no
one
other
of the
gods
biggest
before me.
ways
Second commandment, thou shalt
that we
not
can
make unto
contribute
thee
to
any
the
graven
fandom,
image or bow
regional
down to
fandom as a
them and
whole, and then
serve them.
everyone else.
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, and remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Those were the first commandment, the four commandments that we did. Those deal with our responsibility towards God. If you guys remember anything that stood out to you from last week's study that you guys might want to recap real quick. First command, thou shalt have no other gods before me, not putting anything in
Mm-hmm.
front of God,
Yeah.
and putting it as a higher importance, whether it be your family, friends, your job, your possessions, or anything else. And the second commandment, you shall not make unto you any graven image, making something that is in the likeness of anything in heaven or earth or that is under the earth, and worshiping it as a false idol. Uh, and we were given a warning as what would happen, that God would punish the family generationally because if that sin was committed,
Yeah. Oh, and be
and
watching
then
out for
also a
Ronan
promise
Charizard's channel
of
as well as
mercy
Xanilith's channel.
towards
I've got two
the
different
people that
voices.
kept his
I
commandments.
will let you guys know now. I am voicing Ash Ketchum in one of Ronan Charizard's upcoming videos, and then I am voicing a different character in
Commandment
Xanilith's
3, thou shalt
upcoming
not
What
take the
If.
name of the
So
Lord thy God in
that
vain,
that's coming very soon.
not respecting it, giving it due reverence
Yep.
as the name of the Lord, and God will not take kindly to that
Yep.
being done. And commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. We talked about um, the 6 days of the creation, and the seventh day God rested and so set an example. And then we also briefly talked about um, the Jewish calendar, and we tried to wrap our minds around the possible uh, weird way of setting the week, but somehow or another, it all worked out to 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. That is what we already went over. So, commandment number 5, verse 12 of chapter 20. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And somewhere in the New Testament, let's look this up real quick. Paul tells us this is the first commandment with promise. No, was it promise? Was it John Paul or was it?
I think it was promise.
Was it John? Was it John?
Oh. Hold on.
Let's see. First commandment. Ephesians 6, verse 2. We'll start in verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest live long upon the earth. So even though we do have the second commandment saying that he shows, talking about himself, he says he shows mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. He gives in this commandment, honor your father and your mother. He says, as why? So that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God gives you. And as Paul kind of paraphrases, that it may be well with you and that you may live long upon the earth.
Right.
Let's see, is there any other cross references before I keep talking about it? Verse 2. I need my other Bible. This one doesn't have the same type of cross references.
Oh.
I have my own Bible, and then I have like a travel Bible. And I have a travel Bible here because I don't know what happened to my other one right now.
Yes,
Probably
there could be
somewhere
improvements
downstairs.
in terms of the quality of how it's presented a little bit.
26.
It was kind of sounded a little frozen in some areas, but you could also
I
feel
usually
the
use
warmth.
my other phone.
As if you
I'm
were
pulling out my
giving
uh,
good, warm
because
advice
my
to
phone has left
somebody.
doesn't say this is annoying.
If you're talking to me, I have no idea what you said, Esther.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that I'm pulling out my Bible because I was using a phone with different instructions, but yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't have cross references on the phone.
Which app do you use on the phone?
It's called MySword. Apparently, it's not available anymore, but I got it before it was discontinued, and I mean, I could.
The best one that I know of is Blue Letter Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mom uses that one too.
It's pretty nice. It's got cross references. It's got the interlinear for Greek and Hebrew text, and commentaries as well, and a multitude of different Bible translations that you can do.
Right. They had a cross reference in there,
No, I'm gonna look on the phone instead because
okay.
my Bible, I don't know how to operate this thing. It's a different. Doesn't have the verse. It has all the cross references, but doesn't have the verse number. It just has the letter, and right now I'm not. And it doesn't like
Yeah.
separate them. It's hard to
You
find.
might be you might be able to go a
Exodus
little
chapter 20.
staccato, like
All
Hester
right.
was talking about with music a little
Well,
bit. Maybe a little
cross
staccato
references.
with a
Let's
bit of
see.
a kind of a more than a
So
4/4 beat, like maybe
here
a
are some of
6/3.
them.
I don't know,
Later, next chapter,
like
actually,
not too quickly.
we have one of the um, I say case laws almost. That's where because we know in the next couple of chapters we'll see a lot of the explanation and the details of how to apply the law.
Yes,
And
Right.
yes.
next
I was
in
just
the
gonna
next
say that.
chapter, 21, chapter 21, 15, and 17, it mentions um, he that curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Verse 15 as well before that. He that smiteth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. So those are some ways of showing the seriousness of it all. So in
Mhm.
one sense, that practical way, honoring your father and mother will make you live long upon the land. If you're going to get
Mhm.
executed for doing something like that. So um, I just had a thought. Sec. Give me 1 second. I don't remember.
Oh,
I had it and then I lost it. Let's see. Honor your father and your mother. Living law. I had it. What was
not sure.
it?
No.
My Bible
Anyway,
cross reference to Exodus 23:26, which says, "There shall nothing cast their young, nor be barren in thy land. The number of thy days I will fulfill." So I guess
ah,
it was
You
going
good.
would be
with the
the
day as
person to
that
do this
cross
for me,
Yeah,
reference.
honestly.
it's saying it's another
I'm like,
reference
oh,
of that type of
that's
promise of living long and
literally
being
almost
prospered.
perfect.
Ah, now one of the case laws mentions, and it's kind of the same thing, but not at the same time. One of the other case laws in the Old Testament mentions a son who's being rebellious and will not listen to his father and his mother, and the parents bringing the issue and the son to the elders and with the case and that he had been continually rebellious and would not listen to them regardless, and it had been going on for a very long time, and he was to be stoned to death.
Mhm.
So that not quite the same anyway, it kind of is at the same time. So honoring your father and mother, and I know a lot of people in the modern society don't like this, especially when you're an adult. Like I'm an adult, and I don't have to listen to you anymore, or mom and dad. I can do things on my own. But honoring goes far beyond just obeying.
Right.
Honoring is respect and giving heed to. So when we would say that as a Christian, you are obligated to honor your father and your mother, even as an adult. Doesn't mean you have to listen to them with whatever they say, which in a way you don't have to, in a way you shouldn't, because you are also, the, especially as a man, you're the head of your own house, your own household. Um, but at the same time, that God kept them in your life. He is still able to use them to help you, to give you advice, to give you wisdom. And so, and that doesn't mean that you just listen to it. I would argue that you should go to them for advice. Ask them when you have a question about something. and that you can't figure out. They should be one of your first go-to counselors. Because we yes, we go to other people that we don't even know for counsel, for marriage, for family matters, for financial advice, things like that. But why shouldn't we go to our parents? What? Just because yes, we don't have to listen to anyone, why would we not go to them first? So that's one way of showing honor towards them.
I'm sorry, I
Mhm.
Another thing about let me see, where did I go with that? Another way of honoring them, not just going to them asking for advice. Where is I going with that? This happen all the time, right?
mhm.
There you go.
I don't know what I was thinking. Let's see. Honor your father and your mother.
Yeah. So
Ah,
I
I can
heard my
remember
name.
now. So different, also different requests or desires that your family, mother and father had for you
No.
when you were young, and then they were trying to establish a family vision, perhaps a family goal, or something else along that
Oh.
line. If God has given you another
Yeah,
calling, great.
I'm
But
doing
in
something else as
general,
well on a
another way of
different
honoring
uh
them, maybe
my other
showing
Discord server at Bible
them
study, and so I'm like
that kind of
kind of
respect and carrying
going
out
back and forth between the
their
two.
wishes and their
So
vision for the family.
hey, I'm impressed that
Because
it's even
not
possible.
everybody is an individual. Many times, God, especially in the past, and not people don't listen to it anymore with the modern individualistic society we live in. But God uses families. Not everyone has to always split off and go another way. God many times wants the family to work together and continue on with a family vision, a family business, perhaps, or a goal. And like in my case, our family's vision is to establish a community where we're at and to build up a farmstead that is generally self sufficient and help build up the community to be able to provide for everything else. And we all provide for each other. And so in the next 20, 30, 40 plus years, we can have something like that. That would be a family vision. And I am not being coerced into it, but
I might
I
be
was
able
taught it and I
to.
have accepted it and I want to do it. And that's my way of showing honor to them as well. So there's multiple different ways of showing honor to your parents.
Very true.
And then the promise, of course, so that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Obviously, we kind of already saw it's not just it's a practical way because God will there have things in place to punish dishonor in certain areas, in certain ways. But also, I don't it's not a magic formula that you're going to live super long just because you honor your father and mother. But as a general rule, just like with many other things that God says, God will prosper you in many ways if you honor your father and your mother.
You can kind of exercise your voice to get to a certain point, like Josh was saying. Like
How does that work if you don't
even
have good
as you get older, you
parents?
kind of have to exercise those muscles to really get them
That
to
So,
train. Just the
that's
same with
interesting that
us
you
being singers.
that's
I'm
interesting that you
uh,
just asked
walking
that, Tara,
down
because
the
I was actually just looking
boulevard
in my
really high up like a
study notes in my Geneva
tower.
Bible, and it says,
So,
"By parents also is meant all that have authority
so
over us."
yes, there's that general principle and rule. As for if you don't have good parents, um, that's where honoring can show so much more. Just tying it in, you can kind of tie it in with the topic of loving. And so when Jesus says to love your neighbor as yourself, or even to love your enemies, it doesn't matter what they have done to you. Jesus loved the people that were even hating him, that were killing him at the time. And not just using that extreme example, but in general, if we are to truly love, love is not a feeling, and neither is honor. It can be.
You
It
might
can be
even
tied
be
in
able
with a
to
feeling
kind of
too.
train your voice a
But the
little bit,
true
like
love
not
is an
that
action,
quickly, because
something you
it's 13
do
days
to
from now.
express love.
But like
So
I've
if I
found that
love a
even
person, if I
within
love
2
my
weeks,
siblings,
like
I will give things up
if
for
I've
them.
kept
I
myself at a
will
low
help them out.
voice for a while, it's like,
And
oh
if
wait,
they're
I'm
not
back at a low
good
voice, so
to
I kind of
me,
need to
that should not
get back to that
drastically affect
normal
what I
high
do to
tone that I
them
usually stay at,
as a whole.
because
If I
otherwise
still, if
it ends
they're
up
my
staying
family,
low, and the
especially,
higher voice
I'm obligated to
tends to
love
be a
them.
bit more strained.
And
So
yes, I might not be able to have that same love and that same care, but
mhm.
as a rule, it does not
Yeah,
matter what
yeah, it's
that
just a matter
person
of
was to
it's
you,
just a matter of
especially
going
as
back through
with your
your
parents
own
or your family members. You still should have
all
a
those
love for
notes.
them as an action and do it, even if it's hard.
Oh, good.
And so maybe a practical way, you might not be able to do it in the same way. If they want you to do something that's wrong or not do something that is right, you're not, just like with any other authority figure, you're not obligated to obey when they command you to do something that is wrong or
Yeah, and I'd
command you
love to
not
help
to do something
wherever.
that is
And so,
right.
yeah.
You're not obligated to obey. But there's even in that there's a respectful way to disobey. You do not. It does not have to be in rebellion. It can still be done with respect and honor.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
It can be hard
We should be able to
sometimes.
do a backslash poll.
I'm thankful
That should
for
be
the parents I
possible.
have, but I know there are most parents, you know, our day are not the way they should be, unfortunately.
Slightly.
So my notes that I have say that this commandment acts as a hinge between the two categories of the laws, since it has elements of both divine and interpersonal relationship. It says the dual focus demonstrates that faith to God was of central importance for the family. This is the only law with an entirely
Yeah,
positive message and an
and
offer of reward.
one of my goals, and not to
Hmm.
take away from
And
what you're doing,
and it says
is to potentially do some more original type
it,
stuff.
like the Book of
Just maybe
Proverbs
some
and many other
examples for maybe
instances of
things we're
proverbial
reading
language
right
in the Old
now. Granted,
Testament,
the
promise
starting
included is not a
point.
prophecy, it's a
Um,
proverb or
but
an
I'd definitely like to see
aphorism,
us
a saying
become
whose general
more
validity is
original
demonstrated by
content,
life
especially
experience.
with how the YouTube space is nowadays, with a lot of what ifs and a lot of folks doing different things that help
That
get
sounds
them
about right.
into the spotlight a little bit.
It is a
So
positive commandment.
and
The other ones
because one of my
are
goals with the server is
more
to
or
give
less
people who have original content a
um,
chance.
not
Original,
necessarily
like
negative,
original
but
comics, original,
um,
um,
more of a
even
commandment and a
animations. If
warning.
people are wanting to make
And that would
animations of something that
definitely
they're passionate about,
ties along with
whether
what
it's
Paul
something that
said,
already exists or something
that
that
it's
they're
the
coming
first
up with
commandment
on
with
their own,
promise, and it's definitely
um, that way this gives
I guess
them
you could
an
definitely say it's
avenue
definitely one of the.
in which to
It'd be the
expand their
closest thing to
talents.
a positive commandment
Because I'm looking
that
at
any
a
of
lot
the
of
others
these other
have.
media companies, and it's just like with all the layoffs that's been happening, with the writer strike and everything like that. It's like you don't have enough. We don't have enough studios that really are about the people anymore.
Any
It's
other
all about the bottom line, and just
cross
like each
references
actor is
for
kind of a
this?
number and a big
Oh,
name or something.
I should have remembered this one. You remember that
And so this is
rule that your
hopefully to
parents
give
taught you?
more people a
Standing up
chance
when
and
an
to kind of
older person
rebuild
comes into the
a
room.
type of
Anybody ever
entertainment
taught
that would be both family
that?
friendly and beneficial for everybody.
I mean,
Or at
I've
least maybe
heard it
in your school
before,
book
I
or heard it.
don't know if it was really like taught and enforced for us.
Yeah,
But yeah, I've
it
heard of
wasn't.
Yep.
It wasn't like a super hard rule in our family either, but it was definitely something that I knew about and learned. But it didn't actually. It wasn't
Yeah,
It
and
wasn't
if anybody
originated
wants to do
by
anything in other weeks,
modern
other
society.
days,
It actually is a
just kind
biblical
of let me know. We
principle.
can all just kind of join in and
Leviticus chapter
be like, oh, I
19.
want to practice this.
If anybody wants to look
This works.
there real quick,
This at
in
least
Oh, I
gets
Leviticus
into
19.
the shallow end of the pool, so to speak.
Leviticus 19, and I guess briefly to touch on verse 3 first. Ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbath. I am the Lord your God. And so that's a brief mention. Fear does not mean be afraid and only afraid, but it's a respect and a fear. So if you have fear for driving,
That's the exciting part. That's what we
a
want
healthy
people to do.
fear, that means
Like,
that you
oh, this is
respect it
happening.
and you know what it
Okay.
can do. You know that it's a dangerous tool, even though it can also be very useful and helpful at the same time. So, anyways, you have that, and then verse 32 in chapter 19. Thou shalt rise up before the hoary head and honor the face of the old man and fear thy God.
So
I am the Lord.
I think I already have something
So
on,
that principle
or at least
is
I thought I
not
did. So I'll have
not
to go through
modern. It is a ancient principle.
Mm-hmm.
Standing up is a way of showing respect. Hey, look, now that reminds me, I have something.
There
Elderly
is,
wisdom,
and
probably.
then there's the
Let's see.
events tab. I'm not
Is there anything
finding.
else I
Oh,
have in
there.
that little teaching
I
that I had a
created
while
an
back?
event for this before, but apparently it kind of got deleted. So I will
Proverbs
create an
30,
event.
verse
If
11
anybody is
mentions
an
there's a
artist, it would
generation
be
that
cool to have
curses
a
their
kind of
father and does
a
not
thumbnail
bless
for
their
it. But
mother.
if not, we'll figure
The
something
first
out.
7 chapters
But I'll
in
create an event for this.
Proverbs begin with Solomon speaking to his son or to children, and he's always exhorting them to hear him out. Back to Ephesians 6, children obey the parents of the Lord, for this is right. And all throughout Proverbs, you hear things like, a fool despises his father's instruction, but he that regardeth reproof is prudent. My sons, forsake and do not forsake the law of thy mother, and hear the instruction of thy father, for they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. Jesus himself was only 12 years old when he stayed behind talking with the teachers, asking and answering questions. And he showed that respect towards, because yes, it says, like Ben said, it's not, even though it says father and mother, it's a principle that can be applied to those in authority over us and for other people like that in general. So Jesus was asking questions as well. He wasn't just answering them, he was asking questions. Now, we don't know exactly what kind of questions, but I think it would be safe to assume that he didn't cheat and go off of his um, infinite wisdom and knowledge because he wrote the Bible in one sense. he also learned the right way. He studied the scriptures.
Hmm.
So, and he was talking with the elders. Um, and I got to go mention that standing up for the elderly. Solomon did this in First Kings. See where is that? First Kings chapter 2 and verse 19. His mother Bathsheba went therefore unto King Solomon to speak unto him, and the king rose up to meet her and bowed himself unto her. And he caused a seat to be given for the king's mother. So, another thing, and when I mentioned respecting your parents even when you're older and an adult, Proverbs 23:22, we're told not to despise, or maybe even better understood as we are to listen to our mother when she is old. And if she's old, you're probably an adult.
Mm.
So, we're supposed to also listen to her at that time too and respect her. So, anybody else have any thoughts on that? I think I went on a little bit of a rant there.
Mhm.
If I do that
Hey.
ever, shut me up. Kick me off the stage. I'll have to get myself back in.
Right? Where's that mute button? Anyway, no, it's all good stuff. I was, yeah, kind of wondering, what it would look like for older people to, be honoring their parents, and all those verses helped understand that better. So, yeah,
Awesome.
I should remember the standing up when elders come into the room. I need to remember that more often, I think.
Yeah, I can't say I do it perfectly either, even now, but I do whenever I can, as much as possible. I do
Hmm.
stand up. It's like, and as a practical thing, it's just a way to acknowledge their presence
Right.
and show that you care enough about them. Just like if a friend walks in the room, usually you don't just sit there and you at least say hi, and usually stand up to go greet them too.
Mhm.
At least standing up shows that you acknowledge their presence. So,
Yes,
anyways,
very true.
anything you got for us, Ben? Anything extra?
Nothing that I can think of right now.
Tara?
With Easter.
So what part are we on right now? I'm sorry, I've been trying to focus on both things. I'm finally able to focus on
Mhm.
All right.
this completely.
We just got. I think we're pretty much wrapped up on verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, and that one I went off on a little rabbit trail talking about different um, things in the other parts of the Bible of how to honor your father and your mother, and practical examples and such.
Yeah, I know. Let's see. So in the John MacArthur Study Bible, it does give a footnote of Matthew 19:18 through 19, Mark 10:19, and Luke 18:20. Um, the key to societal stability is reverence and respect for parents and their authority. The appended promise primarily related to the command of life in the promised land and reminded the Israelite of the program God had set up for him and his people. Within the borders of their territory, God expected them not to tolerate juvenile delinquency, which at heart is overt disrespect for parents and authority. severe consequences, namely capital punishment, could apply, as in Deuteronomy 21:18 through 21. One of the reasons for the Babylonian exile was a failure to honor parents. The Apostle Paul individualized this national promise when he applied the truth to believers of his day. So, obviously, we know that the first greatest commandment is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind, and the second is love thy neighbor as thyself. So this is, anyone who's around us. Of course, if we do that, then we love God in the same context. Because these are all meant to fit together, not just as individual commandments. Like a lot of times we tend to try and individualize each commandment, whereas they are one combined entity, which is why the law is written on our hearts in salvation, and not destroyed like people think it is, not replaced.
Right.
So, Jesus said he came not to abolish a law, but to fulfill it. And none of these things will pass until the final day
right.
Of judgment. So, that's pretty much, not completely word for word, but yeah, just in rereading all this, it's like, oh, wait a minute. We tend to get this all mixed up, all screwed up. Because we're trying to individualize it, and then trying to put it towards our own selfish goals and desires. Oh, ye a little faith. It's like, without faith, it is impossible to please God. So, yeah, if we're not abiding by the commandments God has given us, are we truly, really saved?
Well, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so if we're supposed to love him, then that's the way that we know that it's one of the signs that we know that we are saved is when we love the Lord. And loving, like I kind of was talking about just a little bit ago, loving is not just a feeling. It can be that, but love is an action.
Yeah.
And so
it's an action
like
and a commitment. It's a commitment.
Yes.
You have to work hard for it. You can't just let it be. You can't just expect to grow a relationship and not put any effort into it.
Yeah.
So that's where, honoring your father and your mother, that's your most direct relationship other than God.
Yep.
Because if you don't do that, your days on the land are going to be very, very tough.
Yep. Thinking of that, and it's not quite the same, but it's very similar. And John says that if a man says I love God and hates his brother, then he is a liar. So, and that's not just referring to physical brothers, obviously, but the gist is that our certain actions here equal our and show our true heart and what can and cannot happen with the Lord.
But then we get into thou shalt not murder.
Yes.
which is the shedding of innocent blood.
Hmm.
And it can be very difficult to ascertain, even now, especially nowadays, what actually is indicative of murder. And because soldiers go and fight a war for both sides, and they both believe wholeheartedly in the ideals that both sides have. Now some are forced to fight and may not believe, but it's so yeah, that goes now into who are we fighting, and why are we fighting, and why. But even more than that, it's the murder. Are we shedding innocent blood? What constitutes shedding innocent blood?
Mm.
Because each time we sin, we have killed the Lord over and over and over again. He took all our sins upon himself on the cross. What was that?
That would be where, and it kind of delves into like particulars, like many wars that are fought in our modern day are partially unnecessary and may or may not be able to be prevented in some ways. Um, but in general, shedding of innocent blood is in wartime is not quite the same thing. And that, but then also even at least the way in there when there was more of a moral and a code of war, um, and people generally understood that you can still respect your enemy, and so that's where the idea of surrendering comes in. When somebody has surrendered, to then go and kill them afterwards, that would be considered murder, whereas just a couple minutes beforehand would not have been when they're fighting, or killing somebody who is unarmed and not trying to obtain to kill or whatever. If they're unarmed, then killing them at this point. Different things like that in wartime is
Yeah,
just one example.
there's no honor in fighting somebody who is unarmed. The
Hmm.
Japanese and Chinese, they understand that very
Yep.
particularly. Uh, Honor is a big thing in those cultures.
Yes.
Yeah, it says here the
Yeah, that's one example.
irreversible nature of the divinely imposed sentence of death on every manslayer who killed another intentionally stands without parallel in ancient Near Eastern literature and legal codes. Further, the sacredness of human life stands out in the passages dealing with unintentional manslaughter. The accident of death still carried with it a penalty of banishment to the city of refuge until the death of the high priest for the one who killed, but not with intent. Careful
Hmm.
appraisal of the word Moses suggests a broad translation to kill, slay, but denoting the taking of life under a legal system where he would have to answer the question of to the stipulation have to answer to the stipulations of a legal code, no matter whether he killed unintentionally or intentionally. By this command,
Yes.
men would be reminded and exhorted to strive after carefulness in the affairs of life, so that the person to person level, no one would die by their hand.
Hmm. And we mentioned that the other day, another week, like last week or something like that, that we'll be delving into the case laws, and some of those case laws were not just. I mentioned that it's not always, like we said, not the always the intention to kill, but the carelessness. And so, like we mentioned the putting a railing, a battlement around your rooftop, because many people in that day their roofs had it as a second story, and so if you didn't have a battlement around your roof, then that fell underneath the title and of murder, because you were not protecting life, even though you weren't going and throwing people off the top of your house, but having that safeguard there to protect life. And kind of reminds me, when people have talked about the commandments, um, and when in general, if you give a negative, there's usually always a positive to go with it. And so by saying "you shall not kill" also stipulates by necessity, um, you shall preserve life. You will protect life and preserve it, make it that they're able to stay alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I kind of remember back to when you said carelessness, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. You know, there's a carelessness in, because we discussed about how later on we know with the golden calf, the people made it because they wanted some way to observe God, physically.
They weren't fully turning away, like we said. They called it by the name of the Lord, and they said, "This is the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt."
Mm-hmm. And they had good intentions, but they went against what the Lord said. Yeah.
Yep.
They
do say good intentions pave the road to hell.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the disciples later on, where they didn't fully see what Jesus was talking about until Pentecost. And that's when their hearts and minds were fully revealed to the things of the Lord. But just this whole Ten Commandments, there's kind of a newness a little bit in digging through all these, which is why I'm disappointed we lost all the recording last week.
Yeah, that was sad.
Maybe we can go over all these again at a later date, and just kind of like, okay, we're going to go through all of the Ten Commandments, and have maybe set a good amount of time aside to do that.
Yeah, and thankfully we will, like I said, going through the case laws, which I'm sure we'll be constantly referring back to these commandments all the time at that point, and that'll also give us more context, and more things to talk about. Because I know we can kind of go from memory, but we're going to get a lot of specifics in the next couple chapters.
Also, they do get repeated in Deuteronomy. Now, it might take us a while to get there, but they are kind of repeated there too. So
they're repeated there. That's a good point. One place, going back to our specific, "Thou shalt not kill." We remember how we talked about many of these laws seem to be, at least in principle, already implemented, and one of those being "Thou shalt not kill." Genesis chapter 9, which we already read, obviously, a couple months ago. Chapter 9 and verse 6. "Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man." And so that also kind of gives you the reason why God views that sin very seriously, because God made man in his own image, And so each of
Right.
us is made in the image of God, and so that excuse me, is um, a beautiful thing for him to be able to look down on each and every person, see his own image there, marred as it is by sin, is still the image of God. And so for another man to take the life and to destroy the image of God in that sense, it's like an attack on God. I guess I just thought about this. It almost would be like a leader or a ruler or something setting up his own little statue of himself somewhere in the town square, and if somebody was to attack and destroy that thing, or even just the practical thing that everybody else you might have seen in movies and books and all that, the servants, the different representatives of a certain ruler will constantly mention, I represent this person, and by attacking me or speaking against me, you're spitting in the face of the king or whatever, because they represent them. And so, in
Right.
that, I guess in that same way, each of us represents and is the image, even more so than for a man, an earthly ruler. This is we're made in the image of God, and so it is a very serious thing to take that image and destroy it.
Mhm. For sure.
And we are even before that. Really, we had Cain killing his brother Abel, and then um, already knowing that was not a good thing. He could tell he was not willing. It wasn't like, yeah, I did this. That's what about it? Was that supposed to be wrong? He denied it, and so he knew it was wrong.
Mhm.
So even before then, so there's this type of this law in the heart, and or possibly somehow or another God had given these types of principles in the beginning somewhere. Maybe with his talks with Adam. We don't know.
Right.
Honestly, I don't remember everything. Just that there was a
And
lot.
yeah, we'll be going through other case laws with the accidental killing of a person. You give the example of chopping wood and the axe head flies off and or the axe flies out of your hand or whatever and kills
Yeah, if
your
you're ever interested,
fellow worker.
this Bible study
And
Yep.
every Tuesday
then
night
there are
is.
cities of refuge to
I know you've
protect you
never
not
used
from
it,
the
so
law
I would have to teach you.
and from
It's pretty
if
easy.
you had done it intentionally. But the idea was at that time, and even today,
Yeah,
we still have the kind of the similar thing. If somebody,
yeah.
if somebody kills somebody, you kind of get that vengeful attitude that you want to
Thanks.
Yeah.
make it right
See.
and by yourself. And so it was meant to be a city of protection from the family members that may try and seek vengeance. And so we'll see a lot of those examples in the upcoming weeks.
Hmm.
Anything else on thou shalt not do murder, Benjamin?
I have nothing to add.
All right. Anyone else?
Mm, no, I think that summed it up nicely. As you say, all these will be expanded upon too. So
Yep.
we'll be getting into those in the next few studies, I would imagine.
Yep. All right. Verse 14, thou shalt not commit adultery.
Mm, yep.
And so that this sets in motion, this sets the acknowledgement of a marriage covenant and the sacredness of keeping that marriage covenant as well. First example I can think of before this, we already saw with Joseph. Joseph already knew that that was wrong when Potiphar's wife tempted him. He
Right.
says that she was somebody else's wife, and that for them to do that would have been wrong. And so, like then, just again, that principle was already known, and that it was wrong.
Yeah. And Reuben got
Mhm.
misplaced from his firstborn rights because of this.
Yes,
If
to a certain
I
degree. Yeah,
remember that correctly. Yeah.
I think you're right. And
He
he
slept
was
with
not. He was not. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember now. That was specifically mentioned, and when and saying that somewhere, can't remember where was that.
It was when
The
Jacob
end
was
Genesis.
getting the blessings for all of his sons before he
Yeah.
died, like
That
Yeah.
would have been at the end of
what,
Genesis.
48 or
He,
49.
yeah.
Let's
He cursed
see.
him and said he would never excel.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Reuben? Judah. Reuben was the firstborn. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, etc. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed and defiled it. He went up to my couch. So breaking the marriage covenant. And that was not even just that. That was also another sin altogether. That would be like Paul talked about. That would be something that is just really weird and bad and wicked.
You couldn't quite call it incest, but it's almost.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah, definitely. Um, Obviously, we understand that it applies to more than just married couples. Um, that's what I know, and we would technically consider the other acts more along the line of fornication and uncleanness. But that all falls into the
Mhm.
general commandment, just like all these other ones. These are a broad commandment to cover an area of life. And Jesus mentions um, in Matthew, I believe, and a couple other places, that when the Pharisees ask him, uh, "Is it lawful to get a divorce?" He says, uh, "Technically not." No, and that's what he says. As Moses allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts, but from the beginning it was not so.
Mhm.
And he goes on to explain that when a marriage is made, it is joining two people together into one, and that what God has
Mhm.
put together, let not man put asunder. But he does also mention at the same time that if somebody is going to give a right of divorcement, uh, uh, let it be that it should only be for fornication or uncleanness, if uncleanness be found. And I know there
Sexual
are
immorality.
yeah, sexual immorality. And some the exact um like definition of what he was talking about could sometimes can be argued. Some people would understand it possibly even only referring to um, before the actual marriage, and not actually talking about during the what we would call in the engagement, or but what they would be the
Be-
betrothal, because during the betrothal
Yeah.
would be almost considered to them that basically marriage, and then the closest thing we
Mhm.
have is engagement, a promise to
Mhm.
marry,
From what I've
based
seen
on
on the
the people
betrothal
who,
thing, it was actually considered marriage
yeah, they were, except
because they had to
for
get a
not
divorce in
actually.
order to end it.
Exactly, and that was the what I've heard. Um,
Mm.
and so because and the closest thing we have, like I said, is engagement. It was considered marriage in every way except that they weren't together yet. They're just waiting
Mm.
to be officiated, basically.
Yep.
But yes, it was considered marriage, and that's why in was it Matthew or Luke? Can't remember which one. When the angel speaks to Joseph, he says, "Fear not to take Mary, thy wife."
Luke.
He refers to her as his wife, even though
Mm.
they haven't been married yet.
Mm.
And then Joseph wanted to put her away privately so that they wouldn't have to um, make a big deal out of it. He wanted to try and protect her that way.
Mm. Yep. Yeah, and if we go
And
further
then,
over into like Romans and the Corinthians, it speaks to fornication. It says no fornicator
mhm,
will enter the kingdom of heaven.
yes,
So yeah.
I know in Leviticus, towards the middle of Leviticus, I know we're going to get a lot on that topic in multiple different little areas. So that's also upcoming in case laws. See what else? Gee, where are you?
Mm.
Deuteronomy 5:18. That's just from chapter 5 of Deuteronomy is where the other commandments are. You start. Matthew 5:27. That's probably what we already referred to.
Chronicles.
Matthew 5:27. Ah, yes. You have heard that it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whoso looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Why didn't we remember this? I can't remember. I did not. um, think, but this would be where we also more specifically see that God does not just look on the action; He also understands that it's a matter of the heart. And so, even if we are unable to, due to circumstances or other things, if in this case, if you're lusting after somebody else, or just like in John, where he says, if anybody hates his brother, he is a murderer. And we see that it's in the intentions of the heart that if it were possible, it would be done. And so
Mm.
God would consider that a sin as well in that regards. And in a sense, that would also tie in with the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. And he says, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house or his wife. And so that also kind of ties in right there with lusting after somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts? And then we have an easy one. Don't steal. Don't take what is not yours.
Did we do 14 and 15 both in succession?
I literally just read 15.
Gotcha.
So I said, don't steal. You ever stole anything? That
Yep.
would make, you know what that would make
Haven't we
you?
all?
That makes you a thief.
A thief.
Yep.
Stolen your brother's toys? No, I've done that. Guilty.
Guilty as charged.
Guilty as charged. uh, taking that which does not belong to you. That this commandment would establish a personal property as well, and um, certain wicked establishments with their rules. Communism would be one of those, making everything everyone's and basically destroying personal property. Nothing belongs to you, and everything belongs to everyone. And so this verse here establishes there's such thing as personal property, because if you don't own anything, then technically you can't. Nobody's stealing if nobody owns anything. If I don't own it, then it can't be stealing if somebody takes it.
Yeah.
What?
Any
Slightly.
dishonest acquiring of another's goods or assets greatly disturbs the right to ownership of private property, which is an important principle for societal stability.
That's a good way to put it.
You can almost
And
lump
it's,
that
it's
in.
a,
You can almost lump that in with the adultery and coveting.
yeah, because coveting would come first, generally, in some form or another. You want what is not yours, and then committing adultery is, in a way, taking that which is not yours.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And we have other case laws, as usual, where there's different penalties for stealing things. Depending on what it was, there would be restoration, and then usually there would be a type of what would it be called? Basically, you had to pay back more to
Restitution.
restitution. Yes, yes, there'd be restoration and then restitution. Uh, and
Hmm.
you, depends on what it was, but it could be, if you stole a sheep, then
I
you'd
think it was
have to
like
give back the sheep and then five other sheep or something like that.
7 times.
Yeah, I think it
You have
depends
to
on
restore
what it was,
7-fold.
but yeah, sounds about right.
I
And then you
remember in
saw
Proverbs it
others.
said, go ahead.
Good.
I was going to say in Proverbs it says that a man that steals to satisfy his hunger, when he is caught, he may have to give up everything he owns.
Yes, that's a good point. Um, and then there's the more indirect, just more talking about restitution, but not quite stealing. But there's the case law of if you've got like a well, an empty well or a pit or whatever that you didn't cover up, and one of your neighbor's animals wanders and falls into the pit and dies um, because of it. You're supposed to restore and then give restitution as well, even though you didn't steal, you didn't take anything. Yes, Jeff? Hmm? Um, you didn't steal anything, you didn't take, but you're in a it was still in a way your responsibility. And so because something happened to their animal on your property because of something that you failed to do, um, you're supposed to restore and give restitution as well. And I guess that reminds me about going back to do not kill. If your animal, what they mentioned the ox. If your ox has a tendency to gore people, being rough and not being careful at all, and it ends up killing somebody, and you knew that in the past and were warned about it, and then that ox afterwards goes and kills somebody, then you are to be executed, and the ox would also be killed because, in a way, it was an indirect form of murder. Just a side note,
Mm,
remembering that.
yeah. Or if it gored somebody else's ox and killed it, you'd have to pay restitution.
Yes, and that would kind of go right back to where we're at. This is another. It's not stealing, but it's something that's happening. It's
Indirectly.
showing, yeah, it's indirectly and affecting somebody else's personal property, and showing that there's responsibility and there's care to protect personal property. Even a basic
Mm-hmm.
principle that my dad always taught me is like borrowing things. When you borrow a tool or whatever, return it better than you found it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said, there's always a positive on things like this. Do not steal means protect personal property as well, not just your own, but that of
Mm-hmm.
others. So when you
Yep. Yep.
borrow a rake, return it in better shape if at all possible. If you break it, you give them a new, you buy them
You
a new one,
you replace
or you
it.
fix
Yep.
it, you replace it.
Yep.
Um, Obviously, not everything is always able to be returned in better shape, but at least try as hard as you can to restore it in at least the condition it was given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, like, even if it's like if you borrow a machine, fill up the tank, even if it wasn't necessarily full, um, or if it needed greased, or if it needed cleaned off, or even if you didn't necessarily get it dirty, that would be ways of returning it better than you found it. But even
Mm-hmm.
just that, regardless of returning it better, if you use it, clean it off, make sure everything's tidy, make sure that it's fixed and still usable, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anything else? There's 15 minutes each. Leviticus 19:11.
Number 16.
Uh,
You shall not bear false
uh,
witness against your neighbor.
Leviticus 19:11 says, "You shall not steal nor deal falsely." That'd be, guys, another way of stealing would be uh, shady business and trying to overcharge or give false products, and that would be more in modern day too. But there's also the commandment, I can't remember where it is, somewhere in the next couple books of the law, giving using false weights and trying to swindle money that way. When, like in the market, they would use weights to determine a value, and so using false weights
Hmm.
uh, to do that's how another way of stealing. So
And it's interesting how, you look through all of these, and these are the exact laws that both the Pharisees and Sadducees all broke. Pretty much almost all of these. I could be wrong,
mm,
but like I'm not sure about number 12, but or verse 12, but they've definitely got murder on their hands. They've definitely got adultery on their hands.
mm,
In some aspect, they've definitely got
yeah,
steal and false witness, and um, now we would have to probably study a bit more to be like, okay, yeah, coveting and whatnot, but
yeah.
they've broken quite a
I get.
few of
I would
these.
ask for verse 12. Jesus mentions their hypocrisy in when they would say that Jesus mentioned providing for your family, your mother and your father, and the excuse the Pharisees taught that could be given was it is korban, or rather, it is a gift. Basically, I'm giving this money to God and not using it to help you. And so that was one way that Jesus called them hypocrites and doing wrong, because they were teaching that you didn't have to provide and help your family out, instead, because just because you wanted to give it to the temple, give it to God in that way.
Say that again, because I don't think I was really getting everything you were saying.
That's all right. Jesus, I don't remember where it was. Let me look. Jesus mentions, when talking about the Pharisees, he mentions one thing. Let me see. It a gift. That's one example. Matthew 15:5
Right, it was when they were in the
and
temple
Mark
and they were giving
7.
the tithes. Um, or
Mark 7
were
says,
they even taking were they taking from people? Is that what you were referring to?
no, Mark 7, full well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your own tradition. For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whosoever curses father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is Korban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. And ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father and his mother, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things ye do. So, referring to when you had mentioned you weren't sure about verse 12, if they had done that, I was just saying this would be my idea of what of a proof that that was also another one they had violated. They taught that instead of how, if you were able to help your family out with physical goods and your money, they taught that you could tell them, I'm giving to God, I'm giving to the church, or to the temple, and so that I don't, and basically it's a gift. I'm giving to God, and so instead of helping their father and their mother, they would give the excuse that they're giving to God instead. It is a gift, and so in that way they taught dishonor to their parents.
Gotcha. So they were basically, they were causing others to dishonor their father and mother.
Yes. Whether they did that exactly to their own father and mother obviously can't be proven, but at the very least, they're teaching it to others.
Yeah.
So just a side note, since when you're mentioning that the different things that the Pharisees had done, um, we just read, "Thou shalt not steal." Um, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." And I know we generally like to summarize it with um, lying, but I think we already discussed this a little bit in earlier in Exodus. Um, some practical examples of when the truth is not due to certain people at certain times. And so the Hebrew midwives were one of our examples that when um, Pharaoh commanded them to do that which was against God's law, which was to kill the Hebrew babies, and he asked them why they weren't doing it, they gave an excuse that may or may not have been partially true, but it was not the truth. They were purposely disobeying the king and did not tell him the
Hmm.
truth. And so the truth is not always due to certain people. But
Yeah.
obviously, we also understand that generally lying and not telling the truth is also not good.
Mhm.
But in particular, this covers bearing false witness and
Yeah.
and doing it in a more active sense.
Hmm. I think this is tying into to comment on your first comment, Elias. I think this is what that would tie into is, and I think I want to say it's in the Psalms, but I could be wrong. Where if it's for a righteous cause, lying is permitted. Like if you see somebody that's being persecuted unto death and you don't do anything to save them, which might include lying to save them, then their blood's on your head. It would be like hiding Jews in World War II or other
Yeah,
people that they were after. That's a righteous
I'd be curious to
cause.
see that poem because I don't remember reading that, but that's the principle I do understand and agree with. I just don't remember hearing that
Hmm.
poem. I'd be curious
Um,
to see that one.
yeah, I'll have to really think on that and try to remember. It's been years. I just remember hearing a guy, a minister, talking about that. And then the other one that's coming to mind, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Like what this is hitting me with is having somebody falsely prosecuted, like in the case of Naboth,
Mhm.
when he wouldn't sell his land to Ahab. They brought false witnesses against him in a false charge and had him
Yeah,
murdered
yes,
falsely.
and yeah, so specifically, this is generally talking about more or less in the case of law and court and bearing false witness. Even though we also understand to a certain degree, it also applies to generally telling the truth.
Mm.
And yes, like you said, lying for a righteous cause, there are certain times that certain people are not owed the truth.
Mm.
If
Yeah. Which is which
like you
is
said,
which
if
is
you're
so
trying to
much
protect somebody, good.
which is so much the opposite of what we've been taught as kids. Because in middle school,
Hmm.
I had a middle school teacher ask, "Is it wrong to for even a little white lie?" And going by what I was taught, it was like, okay, because this was supposed to set up for you know debates and stuff that were
Yeah.
proper debates. But at that time, a child, even a middle schooler, is gonna be like, well, yeah, lying's wrong. well,
Yeah.
why isn't lying? Why is lying okay?
Hmm.
Because what purpose is there to lie? It has to be really big
Yes.
purpose for it to lie, and you shouldn't be
Correct.
trying to even
Mm.
attempt to lie, really.
Yes, it shouldn't be something that
Yeah.
you look forward to or plan on. But like
Mm.
if like for example, um, I get you guys would all agree that the Bible teaches that disciplining your children is right if done properly, obviously. So, but many times the government would want to step in with child services and such, and even consider proper discipline to be abusive and could take away your children if so. And so,
Mm.
even that, if child services is trying to take away your children, they are not owed the truth that in that case, because they're trying to take away your children, which is not right. Things like that.
Mm.
Are you talking about a case by case basis?
Obviously, yes. No, there's many cases of abuse in families, and I would not be condoning that at all. But like as a in a good and right standard and setting, obviously general discipline of a child is not wrong.
Right.
Well, I mean, like spanking's allowed by CPS, so like it
Right.
just kind of depends. Like there's like I don't know. Even if you like say you left marks, if you're honest with them, usually, um, like you can say, my hand slipped, or to a more sensitive part of, the leg instead of on the butt because
Mhm.
they moved or something. Usually they'll be like pretty lenient and be like, okay, you need to just, try to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. Um,
Yeah.
so with
It just
CPS,
depends.
it's usually if you can, promise that you're gonna try to make sure it doesn't happen again, they're usually like, okay, that's cool. Because I mean, they're
Yeah.
super, super lenient with parents anyway, like for the most part. It depends.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah.
yeah, usually there's the requirements to keep your kids are actually pretty minimal.
Mm.
Like, I know for my sister, she was supposed to have and maintain a job for 3 months, um, and take like some parenting classes. And there was like one other thing, um, get housing or at least be like trying to get different housing. And like she had like well over a year, and it was stuff my son, who was 15 at the time, could have done other than, I mean, someone would have had a co-sign for him for like an apartment or something, but he would have been capable of doing it. So,
Gotcha. So we had bearing false witness. We mentioned Naboth in the case of the vineyard, and then we also have Jesus himself. There are false witnesses in his case, and there's also false witnesses brought for Stephen as well. Stephen's case,
Mm.
where he was put to death. So that would be a very explicit examples of showing the literal bearing false witness against somebody.
Mm.
And finally, thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, or his wife, or his manservant, or maidservant, ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. So he gives a kind of gives a little bit of examples just to try to give you the idea that it really, even if it as something as important or in high value as their house or their wife, or down to their servants or their animals. But then it also just mentions nor anything that is thy neighbor. So again, establishing personal property, that there are things that are not yours, and that so to covet them. This is kind of the only one that really kind of delves into the mind, and kind of also demonstrates again that God not only is concerned about your actions, but is also concerned about your heart and the intentions thereof. And so this would, like we said, kind of go into things like the more practical examples of adultery and stealing, because you're coveting after something that is not yours.
Hmm.
And nothing that is your neighbor's, you're supposed to covet. And it's not, it would not be what we would like. We would not say that. That doesn't mean, oh, he has a nice car. I wish I had a nice car like that too. I would like to get a car like that. But coveting and desiring their car, and it would kind of go into the ideas. There's jealousy, and then there is envy, and then there's, so the envy would be um, as opposed to jealousy. Jealousy is wishing that you had, guarding in your heart that you want something, or that's something that you see. But envy wants to destroy that which somebody else has, and so and doesn't want them to have it either. So,
Hmm. Or to
um,
try to take it from
coveting,
them.
or to try and take it from them. Yes, so. Um, God is jealous over us. He wants us, and He doesn't want us to be anyone else's or anything else's. And um, but He is not, and so being envious. And there's one. I'm just thinking about envious is, and so in the Psalms it mentions, do not be and in Proverbs too. Do not be envious of the wicked. And he gives the example of that, and why? Because God will destroy them eventually. But we are not supposed to covet whatever is our neighbor's. So God spoke all these words. He gave these commandments, and then eventually these will be written down on the stone tablets. But this was the giving of the law. Everybody who had been listening at the foot of the mountain, God is speaking unto Moses and Aaron. Um, Everybody else is at the bottom of the mountain. Everybody's been listening. God gave the law, speaking it out loud verbally. And then we get to the next verse. All the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings, the noise of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So they're definitely not going to die for touching the mountain at this point. They're running away from it. They said unto Moses,
Hmm.
speak thou not with us, or rather, speak thou with us, and we will hear, but do not let God speak with us, lest we die. So there's a fear in the just terrible nature of God. And when I say terrible, I speak of it in the biblical sense, because God is a terrible God. He is an awful God. The idea is that there's terror, there's awe, is not the modern sense of the word.
Hmm.
And there's plenty of examples all throughout the Bible where people, when they talk to God or talk to an angel, they always say, "We're going to die because we've seen God. We talked with God." Jacob did that, and he spoke with God, and he wrestled with God and lived. And uh, many other people did that. Gideon did. Manila, Samson's father, did. And Moses said unto the people, "Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not." So he wanted them to be afraid, to fear God, but
Did
in
I
the
hear that
healthy side.
owl? Hmm. Oh, sorry, I was
One
talking
of
to my mom.
them- All right, let's go. Um, God wanted them to fear him, so his fear may be before their faces, that ye sin not. So he wanted them to fear him, but in the healthy sense that they were afraid and wanted to obey. They didn't, so they would not sin. And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near into the thick darkness where God was. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, Ye have seen that I talked with you from heaven. Ye shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall ye make unto you gods of gold. An altar of earth shall you make unto me, and shalt sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings and thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thy oxen. In all the places where I record my name will I come unto thee, and I will bless thee. And thou shalt will make me an altar of, if thou wilt make me an altar of stone. If you don't want to use earth, dirt, then you shall not build it of hewn stones. For if thou lift thy tool upon it, thou hast polluted it. And neither shalt thou go up by the steps unto mine altar, that thy nakedness be not discovered thereon. So these, after the Ten Commandments, God gives a couple extra notes for serving Him where they were in the wilderness and in general. And so he reiterates, "You shall not make with me gods of silver or gold." And then he says, regarding building altars, he said, generally you're going to build it out of dirt. And that's where you'll sacrifice your burnt offerings and your peace offerings. And he said, "In all the places where I record my name will I come unto you and will bless you." But he says, if you want to make me a altar of stone, do not build it out of hewn stone that has been chiseled and formed. Use natural formed rocks and build it like a puzzle instead. Uh, for if thou lift thy tool upon it, thou hast polluted it. I'd be curious what a commentary would say about that, like the complete idea of what that would demonstrate, not using um, hewn stone. Let's see, and that crossover.
Mine says the reasons for this prohibition are no longer clear, Some suggest that this provision was designed to prevent the Israelites from using the altars of Canaanite holy places, which typically were constructed of cut stones. The altar of burnt offering, the tabernacle, was made of wood covered with bronze. The type of altar described here was used for sacrifices made away from the tabernacle.
So in that case, it's basically suggesting that it was trying to show a difference between them worshiping God and the way that the Canaanites worshipped God. I should remember examples there. I don't, but there are other examples of God and the way He wants things done being done differently, so that it shows the difference between Him and the gods of the Canaanites. So to make their altars very plain, Matthew Henry says, either of earth or unhewn stone, that they might not be tempted to think of a graven image. They must not so much as hew into shape the stones that they build their altars on, but pile them up as they were in the rough. That's interesting. So instead of conforming the stones to try to fit together, using them as God had them, as a natural substance, and building the altar that way. This rule being prescribed before the establishment of the ceremonial law, which appointed altars much more costly, intimates that after the period of that law, plainness should be accepted as the best ornament of the external services of religion, and that the gospel worship should not be performed with external pomp and gaiety. The beauty of holiness needs no paint, nor do those do any service to the spouse of Christ that dress her in the attire of the harlot. And then he also gives commentary on the next verse. Now shall you go up by the steps unto mine altar. He says to make their altars very low. That's what he says. Basically, don't make them super high that you have to even use steps possibly, or as many steps. He says the higher the altar was, and the nearer to heaven, the more acceptable the sacrifice was a foolish fancy of the heathen, who therefore chose high places. That would kind of tie in, if you remember, all throughout Kings and Chronicles, you constantly get the mention of the high places. So apparently their idea was the high places were closer to the heavens and closer to the gods, and so therefore the offerings would be more acceptable if they're up high. So he was basically referencing, don't make them high, and so therefore needing steps up like that to go up high. And I can't remember who mentioned it last week, but basically, their height might bear a decent proportion to the length and breadth. And so if they have to go up those steps super high, here's spoken that if they didn't did that way, they would prevent the inconvenience, quote, here spoken of the discovering of their nakedness. So just a practical thing, more practical than most of the other things that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
We may suppose that the altars they reared in the wilderness and other occasional altars were designed only for the sacrifice of one beast at a time. but the altar in Solomon's temple, which was to be made much longer and broader, that it might contain many sacrifices at once, was made 10 cubits high. So, interesting. Anybody else here thankful for people like Matthew Henry and other people that just devoted their life to studying these things out and figuring this out through history and other things, and just it's just amazing what they learned and that they can teach us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And for R.C. Sproul's study Bible.
I should get that. I've never seen that yet. That would be
I
awesome to
highly
get.
suggest the Reformed or Reformation study Bible. It's really good.
I've heard so much about it. I just never actually got one. I should get that one. I don't. I always wanted to get a study Bible like that, but I never really
Mm,
either. I never really knew which one to get, or never paid attention enough to think about it too much.
right.
I hear so much about that though.
Well, I finally broke down and just got one recently. I was like, hey, if you're going to study it, why not study it from a Reformed perspective
Yeah,
rather than getting dipsy stuff
yeah.
thrown in instantly?
I love Archie Sproul's stuff. He's got a
Yeah.
lot of good information.
Yeah.
I got mine for myself for my birthday. So
Nice.
You got a leather one. Very nice.
uh-huh. Yeah, I was talking to my
Yeah.
pastors and they said basically just the real leather just holds up better. Like
Mm.
one of them had one that was the fake leather and it was just a mess and like falling apart.
Yeah. I love
They said,
the bonded leather, the ones that have a little bit of texture to them. Those are some of my favorites.
Mm. I ended up getting a
Uh,
hardback, but the reason why is because I got a first edition as well.
um,
And the reason why I got a first edition is I found out that later on they took the cross references out of them, supposedly.
oh, okay.
So, but I'm planning to
I
get
will have to
a
check that.
newer edition as well because I want to compare them.
Hmm. If you end up doing that before I get mine, let me know what you find because
Yeah.
if they had take out the cross references, that would be a bummer.
Mm. That's what somebody was saying in the comments on Amazon. So who knows? We'll find
Yeah.
out.
My favorite Bible brand overall is the Holman. I love Holman
Really?
Bibles. I mean, I
Hmm.
haven't had a lot of different Bibles, but right now Holman is one of my favorites. That's what my Bibles are.
Well,
Got a black bonded one, and then I have this one. This one's I like my travel flash study Bible if I'm out and about.
well, are we just about? Have we gone through all these? I think.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we just wrapped up.
All right.
I think yeah, since we're starting on little, kind of I started talking about it in general, and then got sidetracked. So we should probably wrap it up so we can finish the recording, and then
Yep.
whoever needs to leave can leave. Then we can talk about study Bibles again.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with talking about it outside of it.
No,
All right. Hopefully, we have more people next week, and then we can utilize the whole speaker system a little more effectively.
yep,
Hopefully, that
Mm-hmm.
will work. All right.
It's always nice hearing other people's thoughts.
yes. This study and last week's study have been probably one of my some of my favorites so far.
Yeah, they were really good.
All right. Well, who wants to end in prayer? Do we got any prayer requests?
I think I told you guys about my grandma. She's currently back home again. She's doing okay, and she's still on oxygen. And right now, she's using a feeding tube to try to keep her nutrition up. But otherwise, she's doing okay.
Hmm. I'd like to ask prayers for one of my church members. Her name is Yvonne, and she has really cancer really bad. She's basically passing, getting ready to pass on. She's
Oh,
currently in, I don't think they really have her in hospice, but she's in like a rehab facility right now, and they're just trying to figure out what to do next, kind of a thing.
oh my. How old is she?
I think she is about 60. She's in her mid to late 60s.
Okay. Wow. That's sad.
Hmm.
So, my mom heard from her friend who was just here visiting, I don't know, last weekend. Yeah, they were here on Friday last week. Her friend Noreen came to visit. They live in Missouri now. They used to live in New York. Um, really good friends of my family for quite a while. So Noreen and her husband Dick were here last Friday. They drove home before all the eclipse craziness, and Mom got a
Yeah.
message that Dick passed away this morning.
Oh,
So it was pretty
Well,
unexpected. From heart
I'm
issues, I
sorry.
guess. So yeah, Noreen will need a lot of prayers because she doesn't have great relationships with either of her two sons right now. So hopefully this will help mend some relationships, but oof, it's a hard way to get it done.
Wow.
hmm.
Anyone else?
Alan posted he'd like prayers for his preparation for a devotional in the
I
Facebook chat.
yeah, he said he's gonna be doing that within the next 20 hours or so.
Hmm.
Yeah, let's pray for him.
All right. Anybody wanted to close this in prayer? Lord, thank you for tonight. We appreciate. We're thankful that you allowed us to meet. Pray for the prayer requests of someone with cancer, and if you're not going to give her healing, then just pray that whatever testimony is given, others will come to salvation because of her. Pray for the family member that just passed away, our friend. Uh, uh, Give Alan the wisdom words that he needs to say to the folks in New Guinea, and that your will be done there. And pray pray for anyone else, those of us who have unspoken and things that you know about. Pray that everybody has a good day tomorrow. And that we will be able to meet next week and hopefully be able to meet with more people in the coming weeks. That your will be done in that. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Amen.